All right, so week 5. I spent the first part of this week cleaning up bugs from the previous week and just fixing and twiddling around with things. So the statue that blocks the player's path now transitions between all three states properly. It only does them after the player has just killed the boss and entered the zone the statue's in. In addition, it moves the player's camera and returns it properly, which is very important. And the states that it transitions to stay in the statue after you leave the zone and re-enter the zone, even if it's not like the first time it's transitioned to the state. So once it enters a state, it's not leaving it unless the boss is unkilled, which is impossible, but maybe not later. I'll see if I want to keep that feature in the game. The other thing I did with the statue is I went and obviously added brambles to the edge of it, right? Like little spiky bush like things, and I went in and I added animation for those in all three different states, and then in the transition states between each of them. I really like these. I like how brambly and thorny they look. Almost like really realistically, a lot of the spider enemies are supposed to look for the different zone, especially with like the mirrored shadow version behind it with the statue in it. But when I finished all of that, I was left with a pretty interesting question because I noticed that when the legs disappeared all the way, right, and they were gone, the statue was still there, and it didn't necessarily look like it was outside the player's path. So it still looked like it could block the player's path, and yeah, maybe they could go around it, but it was still very much. I don't know that a player seeing that would be able to tell that they can go that way now. And they'd probably try it because obviously if they've removed all of the spider legs at this point, this thing's been had quite a bit of fanfare when they remove it with all the camera movements. But it's not implied nearly as heavily as I would like it to, and I really want to make sure that I get that point across. This is where you go, right? So I started thinking about how I would solve that problem, and I know that the next zone the player's going to go to is going to have them playing another avatar. That's going to be one of the key points of the game, is learning different scales on the piano to move the different avatars around, right? So I thought, okay, what if these statues could be what gives you those additional avatars? So what if instead of a bunny statue here, you would actually there would be another bunny statue at the beginning of the game that you would start with, but this statue that's blocked by the player, what if it wasn't a bunny but it was one of these bird creatures? And then when you unlocked all of the spider legs from it, this bird creature would grant you the ability to use the bird avatar, and you could somehow use that avatar to progress into the next area of the game. So, with that train of thought in mind, I needed to go in and I needed to create a bird avatar. And I figured I could realistically make one frame of the bird avatar, throw it at the statue because the statue doesn't move, right? But if I'm going to make the bird avatar, I may as well go in and finish making the bird avatar so I have it for the player too, because I'm going to have to do that eventually when I'm making the avatars. And I was really excited going into this because I have actually had a design for this bird creature lying around in my notebook for a while now, and I'm really ready to just get it from that notebook into the digital circuits and electricity of the computer. So I started to go to work on that. The other thing with this avatar is I didn't want to use the traditional method of animation that I had been using for the rest of the game, right? So traditionally, when I go in and I animate an enemy, I use the triangle sprites that I have already put into the game, and I move them around in the Godot animator. This has a couple of benefits. The primary one being it's really, really quick to animate them and get them up, so I can get a lot of stuff done really quick. And by a lot, I mean a lot for one person as far as animation goes. But the downside is that the game is now has to somehow be keeping track of the position and rotation and scale of all those different objects. And while that is not going to have a major effect on the game, it should theoretically have at least a little bit of an effect on the performance, and I'm not really very happy with that fact. So I thought, okay, I need to have sprite-based animation then, where I'm using the individual sprites and just changing the whole image instead of moving around the individual objects. And realistically, I don't know if this will make too big a difference on performance. In fact, it's probably not going to. But it will have an added benefit of minimizing animation bugs, because when you animate with the Godot animator this way, and you need to switch between animations, you have to change the state of the object that you're animating in. It's a really complicated way of saying it remembers stuff, right? So you can actually notice this in the bunny character's animation when he hops, because there's a state that changes that I know it's a bug there, but it looks okay, so I left it in. If you watch the idle animation when he's facing downwards, you'll notice the character blinks. But when he jumps downwards, there's no blinking eye in the animation, right? It was never intended there. but it sometimes is still there if you happen to jump while the idle animation is blinking. And things like this will crop up in the game if you're not careful, and they make animated take they throw a kink in the animation process because you have to make sure they're not all there. And in small cases like that, it doesn't matter. There are other things too, like the silo boss, for example, had this dirt particle that I couldn't keep track of that I had to animate out. And if I go this other route for animation, I could remove those entirely from the animation process because there's no memory, right? It's not there. This so this went okay. I decided I may as well, we may as well just try it, see what happens. It took a really long time. So my initial thought process was I could use Blender to get the same keyframe-based animation that I use in Godot, except obviously a lot more advanced because that's Blender's whole purpose is to animate things. So I whipped up a basic bird sprite inside Inkscape, and I exported that into Blender and got everything hooked up and moved around to the 2D animation software. But the problem with that, and I'm really sad because Blender would have been a much faster way to animate this 2D based single sprite animation than what I ended up doing. Because when I tried to do the Blender version, my little tiny laptop that I animate on just died. It did not handle it, and the whole screen would freeze and the thing would crash. Oh, Blender programmers, get on it. But yeah, that really sucked. So my backup then was to use, instead of exporting from Inkscape to Blender, just stay in Inkscape and make each frame of the character animation individually, and I could use the different layers of Inkscape to toggle the visibility between those frames, so I could save them and move the next frame around, and then move the visibility and move the next frame around. And that worked okay. It was just really, really slow. And like the other downside with that too is when you give up each animation having any memory of the previous animation, if you have to make just like a small change to the character, you have to make it in every single frame of the animation. So I remember early on in the animation process, I had the character's beak, the bird's beak was really small, right? And I looked at it and it didn't really look very much like a beak. It was more like an orange face thing, even though it was what's the perspective math? I don't know what the word for it is. It was how it should have been because it's looking right at you, right? It should just be a dot that like expands outwards, but it didn't look like a beak. So I decided, okay, I need to prioritize the beak shape of this character, even if the perspective is a little bit off from the beak. So I went in and I made a bigger frame, and I liked it. It looked nice. It looked more like a bird when I did it. The problem was I had already made the idle animation of the bird by that point, so I had to go in and change the beak for every single frame of that animation, which, couple that over just a few like small changes here and there over every single frame, and it multiplies together to suck up just a lot of time on things like that you go in and you mess with. Other than that, the exporting process from the method that I use in Inkscape sucks. You have to go in on every single frame and choose to export that frame as an image. I really wish Inkscape had animation support built into it. You can actually go on their webpage and it says Inkscape does not have animation support, but if you want to add it, join the development fund. And I actually, or not the development fund, like the developer team, I actually really seriously considered going in, and I'm still considering going in and adding the animation feature to it. But the thing with that is every second of time that I spend programming on something that's not the game, I'm not programming on the game that I want to work on, which, yeah, it's a give and take. I might still go and do it. We'll see. We'll see how I feel later. But that took a really long time, but I am happy with the animations that I got out of it eventually at the end. And so going into those animations, there's a front, idle, and side animation for every single avatar, and you can you're just thinking about it intuitively, because every 2D character has to be able to look away from you to the left and to the right. Little bit of a side secret: if it can look to the left, you can flip it and look to the right, so you can do half the work. But and they have to be able to look in the front. And then in my game, they also have to have jump animations for when you move. So the bunny has a little hop animation he does every time. And you don't really see those jump animations very long, but they do definitely add a lot to the experience of the character moving. For the bird character, I had to do twice as many animations because they're going to have a state where they're on the ground and a state where they're flying. So I had to do flight animations for the front, side, and idle, and ground animations for front, back, and idle for ground and flight. And that's what these are going to look like here. So this is the front idle animation, and I really like the tufts. I got really good at animating little plumes of hair on the carrots for the silo boss, and I use that animation here. I really like the tufts on the bird. And then here's the side animation. I still don't really know how to feel about this one. Yes, the tufts are nice on it, and I do like that, but if it's going to be doing the same thing it's doing when it's facing the front, the bird's head should be almost, it'll look like it's getting squashed from the perspective, right? Because it should be rotating towards the camera, which is hard to do with the 2D triangular art style that I'm using. So instead I opted to have it animate looking up because, I don't know, it's a bird. Maybe he's looking to see if the skies are clear to fly. And then for the back animation, I basically just reused the front animation but made the wings a little bit bigger and removed the face. Um, then for the flight animation. So I fiddled around with these a lot to get them working like I want to. Here's the front idle animation, by the way. And I really like the jutteriness of it, I guess. Like the how it almost seems to pop. In the front, you can really see it in the idle animation. I really like tufts. Again, tufts make every animation better. Put tufts on everything. The tufts on the bird's hair, when they like pop outwards on the upwards motion, it gives it a really big pop that I like. And then here's the side flight animation. I need to still go in and add the back flight animation, obviously, and then the jump frames for the bird for flight and ground. But once I do that, I can export the PNG images. And actually, I have an export to go out, but I can finish exporting it and get the bird avatar finished. And yeah, it'll be really nice. Of course, obviously, I have to go ahead and write the special case for the bird avatar's code. So the bird's not going to... It's going to move kind of like the rabbit, but it'll have different special abilities and some different passives that make it different. And that is not in existence at all. It's only an idea in my head right now. So that'll take a decent amount of time. It's going to take a long amount of time to get those features added in. Normally, adding in a new avatar, if it's going to be anything like the first one, will take a lot of time. Maybe it'll be faster, though, because I have more back-end stuff, architecture built this time, so I don't have to rebuild the wheel every time, you know? And obviously, I'm going to have to get the sprite for the bird into the statue in the bunny stone what the statue was originally, because that was the goal from the beginning. And once I do get that built in, I do have a bird avatar that I can change to, even if I don't have the abilities implemented yet. I need to make a system for the player to switch avatars, because I don't have it yet. There's no way for the player to change the avatar, even if there is another avatar, which there isn't right now. So I'm thinking about having spots you step in to change them. That way I can know in any given zone the player has access to these avatars, and if I need them to have access to another avatar, I can make it a challenge to get to that spot that you walk into to change them, right? If you want to change into an avatar, go through this gauntlet, this challenge to change it, and then you can use that to solve some other puzzle somewhere else, right? Actually, this design is it's comically reminiscent of like the old Lego Batman games, how you would walk into a zone and it would change your NPCs from one to another and you have to like solve puzzles with it. I don't know how I feel about that. We'll see if I actually like the design. I've also been considering having it added as a combo the player does, because I have a whole framework of Godot nodes that I whipped up to keep track of combos from the player, right? A series of note inputs, because I figured if we're going to have a game where you play on the piano, it would be really cool if the player could play a song that they could see on the screen and have it do a thing, which is the whole point of the statue motif, which I still have to get around to doing. But I don't really know how that would necessarily work with different scales. Like, there's nothing in the game stopping me from telling it use the note indexes of the scale that you're playing to make the combo. In fact, that's how the game's programmed now, right? I tell it, you're going to be in the major scale, use these indexes for movement, this index for special ability. If I switch that scale to the Mixolydian scale, which is the birds are going to be, use these indexes for movement, these keys for special abilities. And it doesn't care what those scale notes are. It's just note 0, 1, 2, 3 for the game. It doesn't make a difference what the actual physical notes that are being played are. The problem is it does a little bit to the player when you switch between characters. Like if I'm going from the Mixolydian character to the major scale character, it would be really weird if the combo that I was playing, or realistically a combo in this case is analogous to a song that I was playing was in that Mixolydian scale, because you're going back to the major scale, and Right now, I would ideally prefer to have it so that you play the combo where you go to the scale of that other character in that character scale. But that's a little bit more complicated because the game input is built on the index of the scale that you're in for the reason that the player can switch in case I want to use combos elsewhere. So I'd have to undo a lot of work to get that built in, and I don't necessarily know, even if I want to allow them to switch between the avatars in every different zone. So it would be very interesting if you were stuck as an avatar in a certain zone and you need to figure out a way to get to another one. But at the same time, from a design perspective, combat would be very interesting if you could switch between avatars in mid-state, and it would give you access to more options and stuff to fiddle around with and play throughout the different gauntlets of the game that you're going to be running up against. So lots of design decisions to be made there, and realistically, I think the best way to find the answer is to play test it and figure out what I want to do. And realistically, we could end up. I guess maybe we could use a combination of the two of them. So maybe when you walk into the zones, it's almost like giving you a combo item that's consumed and allows you to switch. So you could stock up on like bird combos to switch to. I don't know. It's wild speculation means nothing without some extra work thrown into it yet. So that's a problem for future David. um, yeah, so next week, obviously finishing the animations on the bird avatar. Once I get those finished, I need to have change the statue to obviously be a bird, and then work on the system for changing avatars. And then I need to go in and make the statue animate. I've been wanting to do it for like, I think it's 3 weeks now, and I always end up doing something else because something else leads to something else, which leads to something else, and I just don't end up working on it. I did work on the design statue enemy though, and I've been thinking a lot about the design. The problem is I really like the design that I used for the statue enemy, and I don't want it to be a one-off enemy like the carrot enemies that have their one zone. Uh, yeah, it's a good tarantula. I like it. It's better than the existing tarantula. But so I need to make an actual physical design for him, which will take a decent amount of time figuring out what I like. Yeah, but see you next week.